Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator for the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for joining us on this stunning Friday. Beautiful, crisp fall weather. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you so much for being here as well. Today, we have the honor of having author Janet Sherlund here with us, presenting her book, Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. Let's listen as Janet discusses what happens when an adopted child with a lifetime of abandonment issues finally discovers her family of origin.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Osterville Lights. Is that years ago, I was telling Amy, when my husband and I were going to buy a vacation home on Nantucket, we had a friend that had a home here, and she's like, oh, why would you buy a house on Nantucket when you could buy one in Osterville? And I had never been to Osterville, and this is my first time here. And as I was driving along from the ferry, I thought this is a very beautiful area, and I'm really glad to be seeing it finally. So thank you for welcoming me. I wanted to start out by reading the prologue of my book. I think it will give you a flavor of my journey, and then I have a brief slide presentation that I'd like to talk to you about each one. So this is my book, Abandoned at Birth, and this is the prologue from 2021. I drove to the adoption agency on an unusually warm November day, 65 degrees with bright sun and pure blue skies. Most trees still held their leaves, the consequence of a warm, wet autumn, and the roadside glowed green and gold with only occasional streak of orange. The radio blasted Springsteen, and I drummed the steering wheel, my mind wandering with the ease of familiar roads. The route took me through the town where my husband Rick and I had lived for 30 years, and along roads I remembered from my childhood. Given my destination, the drive through my past was poetic. Snugged into my seat, sunlight curling around my shoulders, I was grateful for the opportunity that lay ahead to read excerpts of my adoption file from 1954. 11 years earlier, I took the same drive to the agency while searching for my birth parents. Such information hadn't been offered to me then, but now, many years into a difficult journey, the compassionate social worker thought it might be helpful. While I had since discovered many facts about my adoption, I was looking for nuanced details. Did my mother ever hold me? Have I ever seen her face? Where was I between my birth and adoption? I hoped reading specifics would bring an aha moment of understanding and prayed for much needed closure. Fortified by all I had learned over the past decade, I walked into the agency with a big smile, confident the pages I read today would be the holy grail, the final piece of the puzzle. Gloria, the social worker, welcomed me. We chatted as she guided me into a small, friendly conference room with stuffed animals nodding down from a bookshelf and easy chairs arranged for conversation. She sat across from me, holding some papers on her lap. I saw the letter this agency sent you in 1977 when you wrote to request information. I nodded, recalling the letter I had written 44 years earlier, just after college graduation. It asked about my ethnicity, what my birth parents looked like, why I was given up for adoption, anything they were allowed to tell me. The agency's reply was breezy and carefully edited. They had privacy agreements to uphold, adoption laws to follow. I thought it was awful that they didn't tell you every non-identified fact from your file. This is your story, your life, and you're entitled to know more. She reached across and handed me what was a summary of interviews with my birth mother. Take your time reading these. I'll be in my office next door. She slipped out and left me with the faded and discolored documents, some handwritten and some typed pages from 1954. The story of my beginnings. The old paper was covered with the soft dents of typewriter keys and a social worker's neat professional script. Some pages were stiff and crinkled, others limp. They all smelled musty. When I touched them, It was as if they could transport me back to the day I was born, to the stories others knew, but I did not. On the first yellow page, Sherlund Ann Jones was listed as my unmarried mother. I was listed as her child, Linda Lee Jones, born on July 1st, 1954. My stomach whirred to see that name typed out on the official paper. I was once someone else with another name, another identity. 11 single-spaced pages described their interviews with Shirley and noted how distant she was, how removed from the process. My birth mother first called the agency on July 7th, 6 days after my birth, during which time I remained in the hospital nursery, fed by rotating shift nurses. My mother never saw, fed, or cared for me in the hospital, a fact the agency noted as unusual. They offered her multiple opportunities to see me, a standard practice, but she declined each time, instead asking how soon she could sign the papers for my release. When the baffled social worker finally asked if I was even real to her, she replied, frankly, no. Throughout the paperwork, I'm referred to as Shirley Ann Jones' daughter, Linda Lee, and it catches me off guard each time. Being Shirley Ann Jones' daughter is entirely foreign to me, and the idea of my ever having been Linda Lee Jones is bizarre. On page 8 of the notes, there's a paragraph about baby Linda Lee. Linda Lee has become a very beautiful, alert, and attentive baby. She has blonde hair, blue eyes, and a fair complexion, and is filled out very nicely. She is an alert, happy, emotionally sensitive baby whose present rate of development is definitely accelerated. I didn't know how to process this description of myself. My life began when I was adopted. I had no concept of my existence at this age or of using that name. And while I didn't identify with her, Linda Lee sounded like a lovely little baby, and I was eager to learn more. Toward the back of the file, a developmental examination page caught my eye. At that point, I was in a foster home run by Mrs. Person in Far Hills, New Jersey. A psychologist gave me a Giselle developmental scale test to assess my early abilities against normative data. At first, I read it with only passing interest because how much can you tell about a 5-year-old infant? But as I skimmed the report, something shifted. It described a very real baby, one I saw clearly in my mind's eye, someone I recognized as myself. Linda Lee is an alert, happy, emotionally sensitive baby. Adaptive, language, and social behavior are advanced. Linda attends quickly to the dangling ring when it is held over her chest and follows it well past the midline. She has a relaxed grip on the rattle and gives a specific facial response to sound. Linda is a very social baby. She smiles readily in a play period and gets quite excited when the examiner talks to her. Linda is a well-developed, alert, responsive baby who makes an excellent impression on the examiner. I could see myself watching the ring and holding the rattle, and the description of me smiling easily, being visually alert, and having a particular facial response was familiar. So were the comments about my being emotionally sensitive and enjoying interacting with the examiner and making a good impression. I connected with this. I saw myself in that baby and recognized Linda Lee Jones as me. I was born with traits I still have, and they came from Shirley Ann Jones and my birth father. I am their blood. I came into this world as someone else before I was given a new identity by the people who adopted me and changed my name to Janet Lucille Leaf. A few sentences later, when I read Linda Lee Jones was released by her mother on July 30th, 1954, I became unglued. I was officially Linda Lee Jones when I was released, not a vague baby girl Jones waiting for an identity. I had a name and a heritage. I was Linda Lee Jones, relinquished by my mother, my legal and officially recognized mother, Shirley Ann Jones, who signed the release form. The social worker noted, Shirley again did not display any emotion, thanked me for all my help, and said she felt quite relieved. I couldn't shake the image of little Linda Lee lying in the middle of the crib, watching the rain and shaking the rattle for the examiner. She was a newborn, alone in the world, sleeping temporarily in a foster home far away from where she started or would end up, waiting for an agency to nullify her heritage and assign her to strangers. My breath caught. I felt small and scared. I wanted to weep for that little lost baby Linda Lee, for me. Suddenly the room felt close. I pushed damp hair off my forehead and struggled for air. Shuffling the papers together, I stood, unsure my legs would hold me, until I was Gloria in her office. Thank you so much for letting me read this, Gloria. It really meant a lot to me. I know it did. She smiled with an understanding I didn't yet have. All I wanted now was to get home. I hurried out to the fading afternoon and sat in my car as I gathered my wits to drive into rush hour traffic. There was no looking at foliage color on the drive home or grooving to the boss. I was melting into unfathomed sadness, sinking into my seat as grief gathered in my brain and dropped through my center like a lymph. It was excruciating, and I didn't know what to do with the intense emotion. It was primal. There was no language for what I felt. There never had been. It happened long before I could think in words. I called Rick but could barely speak. I hurt so deeply was the best I could do. He stayed on the phone with me for the rest of the drive home. We didn't talk much, but it felt good to know he was there, listening and wishing he could ease my pain, waiting for my car to pull into the driveway so he could wrap his arms around me. By the next morning, every part of me ached. It was difficult to breathe, and my brain was completely fogged. The hurt reverberated through me like the tolling of a large, low bell. In my mind's eye, I saw myself lying in the crib, and I repeated the name over and over. I don't need Jones. I don't need Jones. Who is she? Who am I? Why didn't my birth mother want me? All connections to my bloodline, my biological family, had been denied. The identity I now held had been randomly assigned through an agency. Lingering, wordless grief suspended in me like smoke. Pulling on an oversized sweater, I wrapped my hand around a cup of tea and looked out at the sky, my thoughts diffusing into the pale light. So that came at through the end of my journey. Thought it sort of could take you along with me as the journey I did take. And this was okay, there's the person. So one of the things that a point I think it's really important to make is that adoption is trauma. And I will be speaking to that this afternoon. It's also the only trauma in which we expect the victims to be grateful. And while we are grateful if we have a loving home, unfortunately not all adoptees do, but many did, I certainly did. Two things can be true at once. You can be grateful for having a loving home and have been traumatized by being adopted. They are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, it is the gratitude that we have for our adoptive families that silence us, that never allow us to speak our truth, that never allow us to talk about the sorrow and the grief and the loss and the abandonment and the rejection, because we don't want to hurt the parents we love, our adoptive parents. And we don't want to bring up these weird, uncomfortable things that no one talks about. And so as a child, you assume that something wrong with you. No one's telling you that it's normal to feel this way when you're adopted. So you just stifle it. You don't want to hurt your parents, and nothing bad has happened to you. You have a perfectly loving family, but you feel other. You can feel it. It's chemical. It's cellular. You know when you are not of the same DNA as the people you are living are. It's just that. And while everyone deals with that trauma differently and maybe at different times in their life, that is the reality that adopted children grow up in, especially those of us 50s, 60s, and 70s who grew up during the era of close adoptions. And so not only are we asked to live what feels like a false life, like I know I'm not Janet Leeds, it's my name, but I don't know who I am. I don't know why I look like this, and I don't know why I was given up, and where did I come from? I wondered who my biological family was every day of my conscious life, like, from as far back as I can remember. And yet I have loving parents and a perfectly fine home. Love is not enough. Love, and one of the things I want to point out is that I think any of us asked to take a child in and love them would love them and take care of them and give them everything and raise them. And that's wonderful. But unless we recognize their loss and their grief and their disconnection from their true heritage and their authentic identity, we are not doing enough for them. We need to recognize who they are. They are not your biological child. You need to recognize and respect who they are in order to make them be able to be a whole and integrated human being. Adoptees have more than 4 times the suicide rate of the general population. They are overrepresented in hospitalization for addiction and mental health and overrepresented in the penal system. This is a trauma, a culturally unrecognized trauma. And we're talking about it so that we can do it better going forward. So these were my biological parents when they were in high school. And there's something, when you grow up without knowledge of who you look like, without being around people who mirror you, without seeing the same gestures, maybe having the same sense of humor, sometimes when I was growing up, kids would say to me, oh, I don't look like my parents, or I don't share interests with my parents. That's not important. Yeah, but I bet you look like your grandmother, grandfather, your aunt, uncle, your brother, your sister. Their families have these common traits. And when you're in that, you are taking in knowledge of yourself, and you are inheriting all the heritage and all the stories and all the things that came before it came through that bloodline. When you don't have that, there's nothing there. There's just nothing there. And it's really hard to form a sense of self when there's nothing there. And there's something called genealogical bewilderment. They actually named it back in the 70s, and it was even further back than that. One of the things I like to ask people is, can you imagine your life if you had never seen your mother's face? Or how about if I said to you, pretend the buildings outside there are houses. How about I said, okay, tonight, I'm going to take you over to that house over there. You're going to live there for the rest of your life. Now, the people are really nice, and they really want another member of their family, and they're going to take such good care of you. But you're going to live with them for the rest of your life. They'll change your name, but you'll be fine. And even as an adult, you'll go, that's going to feel odd. I don't know them, and what kind of food do they eat? What does their house smell like? What do they look like? And what do they like to do? And I don't know those people. I don't go live with them. And you have brains and you have language. But when an infant is placed in the hands of strangers, they know it. They feel it. Those people don't smell like their mother smelled. They don't have the same voice, the same mannerisms. I've recently been blessed with my first grandchild. I had a granddaughter who is right now 6 weeks old, and she was visiting last week. And I'm looking at her. She's the age I was when I was adopted. She knows her parents. She knows them so well, and she is mimicking everything about her, mimics my son. It is just amazing to me. And I think what she would go through if we took her and handed her to strangers today. So, okay, bye, have a good life. So these are the people that created me in high school. And these are my adoptive parents, Audrey and Bob. Shirley and Larry were my biological reserve for Audrey and Bob. And this is me the day that they brought me home from the adoption agency, and I don't know if you can see it, but I'm crying. And, in every picture that was taken that day, I was never shown these pictures. In my entire life, I never saw them, and after my parents died and I was cleaning up the house and found them. And there were like a dozen pictures. And I am open mouthed, screaming in every picture. Whether I'm with my grandmother or my brother or my father or my mother, whatever picture they took, and they took a lot of pictures that day, I am just wailing. Because they're strange, like, where am I? Who are these people? What are they doing to me? It's like, it was such a shock. And, you know, when a baby is in utero and they hear their mother's voice and they feel her rhythms, and my gosh, they're one with her. And then at birth, there's that sudden disconnect. And that's why it's so important for mothers and babies to reunite after birth, and the baby feels that, the smells and the sounds and the chemistry of their mother, and they feel safe again. Well, for babies, whether they're put in an incubator or there's a tragedy when the mother dies at birth, or they're taken for adoption, that separation of everything that they felt made life safe and whole is now gone. And it's gone suddenly, and in the case of adoption, it's never returned. And the shock of being with strangers, even loving strangers, who I know wanted children and were happy to have them, they were not educated, especially back then, in what the children were feeling, what the adoptee was feeling, and how they needed to be reassured, and what they might need. And my older brother had been adopted as well. So one of the things that most adoptees feel their whole life is this desire to search, to find their authentic identity and their heritage. And it has nothing to do with love. It's not because you don't love your adopted family. You can love them very much. It has to do with discovering who you are, feeling that sense of authentic identity. It's almost like when you had that primal wound, when you were taken from your birth mother. It's almost like it's like an animal. It's like this cellular thing where you find this drive throughout life to get back to that connection, to feel that connection one more time, so that you can feel whole and then move forward. And then if you don't feel that like wholeness, then you're in struggle to move forward. But it's very cellular. And my experience, especially when I found my biological family, is how cellular belonging and identity is, how chemical it is. It's like the penguin mothers who can look out over 2,000 baby penguins and know which two are hers. They all look identical to us. There's stuff about belonging and biology and identity that we don't understand, or we certainly don't talk about it. And so this emptiness, this black hole, this yearning, and this yearning to be connected at some point safely with your mother, and to always go back to that. My husband pointed out when I was writing the book, he said, you know, the dying soldier on the battlefield cries out for his mother. I mean, that is like the most deep, safe, primal relationship that we take with us as human beings. When that's been severed, there's something truly fundamental. So these were there were 4 siblings that I mentioned, but these were the ones I grew up in. We adopted my younger sister when I was 7. And they talk about sitting around the dinner table at night, perfectly loved house, you felt everyone was different. You just felt it. Everyone was sitting in their own genetic dust. Like, who were they? Who was that person? It's like the difference between, you can get together with your friends, really good friends that love and support you, and you can feel really great being with them. Feel different sitting around together with your family. There's just even if you don't like your family, you get around them and you feel that connection that you don't feel when you're not sharing that. And this is various stages of the family I grew up in, and we were all adopted. We all had the trauma but just as everyone does in life with trauma, we all dealt with it in different ways. Two of my siblings turned to drugs and alcohol. One of them has lived a life of mass denial. I, for some reason, was propelled to it. I couldn't look away. It was like, I felt like I was gonna fix myself if I could just figure it out. If I just learned about it, read about it, studied, I would finally understand it and I'd fix myself. And, but I developed tremendous panic disorder. I had panic attacks that were like, I never took LSD, but it must be like being on LSD. Every time I had one, I thought I was dying or going crazy. And I lived a life not free to be me and not free of choice, but a life that was how to avoid fear, how to avoid the feeling of being alone, and always just wanting to be the perfect child. So I felt safe in my adopted family, and just being safe and in familiar places. And it took away choice in my life. There are a lot of choices I couldn't make because of my fears. And that was the expression of living with chronic anxiety every day. And so I just felt this big black hole in this emptiness, and I suffered with this massive anxiety disorder until well into my 20s when I finally was correctly diagnosed and helped with. When I was in college, I did write to as I referenced in the preface, I did write to the adoption agency and asked for any information I could have. I didn't, my parents look like, why did I have blue eyes and a pug nose? Why was they giving it, what's my ethnicity? And, like I said, I got that little snippet of help, which helped, but wasn't all the truth, and just left me learning even more. But it helped. I was able to meet and marry a wonderful, supportive husband and have two wonderful boys of my own. But I always wanted to find my birth mother. Thought out, who is she every day? Literally would walk around the street, if I was outside or in the city, and we're looking at faces. I don't like you, or someone would say to me, you look like, I go, I don't, I think I wasn't thinking about a celebrity, because I was thinking maybe they know my mother, maybe they know someone who looks like me. So it literally haunted me my entire life. And then when I had children and I couldn't answer the questions on the, pediatrician form, does this run in your family, does that run in your family? And I just have to keep saying no, no, no. And I thought, this really isn't fair. Now they're going to suffer because I don't know who I am. This is a picture of me in high school and my, both senior pictures of me and my biological father. When I was in my 50s, I was talking to my adopted mother about the agency. I thought it had long since closed. And she said, no, it's still there. In fact, they have a website. And so I immediately Googled it and discovered that not only were they still there, but in the corner, this one menu, it said search. And I hopped on that, and for $650, they would, an application that you filled out, they would reach out to your biological parent, and if both parties agreed, they would connect you. And so for the first time in my life, I had the ability, because I had nothing to go on before. I had no name, no place, no information with which to search previously. And so I applied, and when they did find my biological mother, she lived 2 towns away from me, it turns out. And she refused to meet me. She said she was ashamed of that point in her life, and she wouldn't meet me. And the social worker said, I didn't need anything from her. The social worker said, Janet's a lovely person, and she doesn't need anything from me. And she said, no, she wouldn't meet me. But they had the name of my biological father, which is really unusual for 1954, because men didn't have any rights back then. And they said, do you want us to reach out to him? And I thought, I had known from that letter in 1977 that he did not know he had bothered me. So he didn't know I existed. And I thought, well, how can someone who doesn't know I exist, how's that can matter? And he's a man, I need to train my mother. But then I thought, my sons, and I thought maybe I could get some medical information that was important. And so I said, sure, go ahead, whatever. Very casually. And My birth father was then, 75 years old. Let's see. Stay there. And a retired New York State trooper at home watching Jeopardy, and he gets a phone call. You have an adult daughter, she'd like to meet you. And he said, call me back tomorrow night. Because as a investigator for his whole life, he thought it was a sham, a scam. He discovered it was not, and when they called him back the next night, he said, if she has my blood, of course I'm gonna meet her, she's my daughter. So that was, and that was just an incredible story, and meeting him transformed my life completely. My mother, continued to refuse to meet me. She just couldn't get over the shame. And that was devastating to me. I did not want anything from her but to know her and to share. And later when I met other members of the family and I heard how many things we had in common, I just thought I always wanted to share that with somebody. I always wanted to share that the things we collect and are interested in and care about with someone. I didn't share that with my adopted mother. Very painful, but this was the day I met Larry, and when I talk about it being cellular, the day we met at a restaurant halfway between our homes, I didn't know 5 things about the man. I could not have answered 5 questions. He didn't have any online presence, so I hadn't been able to, I knew his name, but I hadn't been able to research him. I didn't realize that was common for law enforcement. But I didn't understand why he didn't have any online presence. Couldn't have answered 2 questions about him. Went scared out of my mind. My husband was with me. We met. The story's in the book, but I'm holding my winter coat here, and I'm just like I'm freaking out. And all of a sudden, he's standing in front of me, and he puts his hands where my twins, they were dead. And I look into his, and I mean, like that, this big black hole I had had my entire life filled right up, just a chunk. And I couldn't answer 2 questions about the man, but I looked into his eyes and I made sense. I mean, this is just phenomenal. This is beyond, this is cellular, this is chemical. This is like, I was home. I had found my people. I couldn't have told you middle name. I mean, Blair Patrick, but it was uncanny. And then I met 2 of my siblings, 2 of his kids, and it was just, and we talked, and we all felt like we had known each other forever, and it was just wonderful. And again, it was like, I don't know these people. How can I feel like this is the truest family I've ever had? But it was incredible. And there he was, he came to Nantucket for a week or 2 that first summer, and we had just the best time together. And sadly, he passed away 2 years later. But we had that time together. This is my brother, Sean, also his trooper, and one of his sisters, Jess, and nephews. And it was just, and this is my birth mother, Shirley, when I met her, finally, after 5 years, refusing to meet me. And the social worker, Gloria, who I referenced earlier, said, you should write to your siblings on her side. You're all adults. They have the right to know that you exist and make up their own minds. They want you. And I didn't do that for 5 years because I was afraid. I gave a lot of reasons to myself, but what I was really afraid of is I didn't want to make her mad. I didn't want her to be mad at me because I wanted her to love me, and I wanted her to love me. And after 5 years, it wasn't happening. And someone gave me Joan Didion's book, Blue Nights, and I was reading that, and she talks about her daughter, Quintana, her birth family, and that, and I got mad. There's things that she said in there that were like typical insecure adopted parent things, and I got mad. And I wrote a letter to these 5 siblings I had on Shirley's side, and I overnighted it to them. And I thought, well, that's it. Whatever. Maybe I'll hear from someone, maybe I won't. I don't even know if I like these people. If she raised them, she sounds awful, whatever. The next night, I had a call, and this voice on the other end of the phone said, hello, Janet. This is your sister, Diane. And it was one of my two sisters on her side, and we talked to her as that all five siblings that Shirley had after she had me were welcoming and embraced me, and it was wonderful. And it wasn't until after that they convinced her to meet me. And these are, there's Diane on the left there, and next to her right there, and my other sister Carol. And it was still, to bring it back to the kind of thing, even though Shirley never wanted a relationship with me and was cold and distant every time we met about 3 times. I felt the oddest sense of belonging and understanding myself when I was with her. I physically felt at home and at peace, even though emotionally she was holding me at arm's length. And I'm so glad I did meet her, because even though it was painful to have that rejection, I look like her, I walk like her, I talk like her, I dress like her. We share the same colors. I learned so much about myself. And I also learned cautionary tales. You know, we share traits that I never like to think of as really true to me, that she had in spades. And I'm like, oh my God, don't let that in. You know, like that is in me. I don't want to be like that. So it was, I think you have to know it all. You have to know the good and the bad to really know yourself. And so I'm glad I met her. I think that just like no biological child is born into a family without issues, every adoptive child, you need to know it, because you need to integrate it into yourself. It's part of what you have to deal with in life. And you can't be made to think that life's a fairy tale and there's nothing you know about your life. And finally, this is my granddaughter, 6 weeks old now. That's my son, younger son, with her at half an hour old, and she's looking right into his eyes, and that's me looking at her. And I, again, thinking, seeing everything that's passed through the DNA to her blows my mind. Seeing how aware of them and how connected she already is to them at 5 weeks blows my mind. I'm sad for all the things I lost when I didn't get to experience that. And I certainly understand that I didn't wish I was raised by my biological mother. It would have been devastating. She wasn't a great person. But I would have had other trauma being raised by her. But I wouldn't have had this foundational trauma. And I wouldn't have had all this trauma had the world understood adoption better and been better able to give me information and help me understand what I was experiencing as I went through it. And I end up having gone through this experience with the knowledge that as an adoptee, you're always ultimately alone. You are never fully a part of your adopted family because you feel other. And you're never fully a part of your biological family because you didn't grow up with them. You didn't have Christmas mornings and going off to school and doing homework. And so you're sort of part of each. And you have to integrate that in order to have any semblance of peace of mind and happiness. You have to take both of those pieces and put them together. But people often ask me, are you happy now? And I said, when you grieve, you never get over grief, but you learn to let it into your life and you walk alongside it. And that's what being adopted is like. You grieve what you didn't have and what you didn't know and who you weren't. And you accept it and you walk along with it. And I'm so glad that I found all the pieces of me that I did so that I could learn who I was, but authentic me, biologic me, and the adopted me. And without all that information, I would not be as much at peace as I am now. And I am living with that reality of what it was to be adopted. And I'm talking about it because if you're ever asked to weigh in on things like your state's rights to open birth records or not, 40 states still have them sealed, or other issues that come up nowadays with people, donor conceived individuals. There's all sorts of issues that continue to come up that center around adoption. And I really think it's important for us not to just understand the adoptive parents or the biological parents' point of view, but those of us who are asked to live this life. what is this really like? And I will end with a good friend of mine who's an adoptee and a therapist specializing in adoption and who runs an organization that is an adoptive support organization in Boston. And she said, those of us who are adopted would never wish this on anybody.